Okay, welcome everyone to today's webinar where we'll be talking about two strategies in one video, mastery learning and overlearning, because even though they are completely separate strategies, I do like to talk about them as if they are related because they have a lot of similarities and in many ways they can be taught together, or not taught together, but used together at the same time, and that will make a bit more sense as we go through the various different aspects of both of these strategies in a short time. Now, the basics of mastery strategy and where we'll start our discussion today is that students typically need to score, let's say that is 0 down the bottom there and 100 there. In most cases, students need to score around about 50%, let's say a pass mark, and then they move on to the next topic. And in actual fact, what does quite often happen in today's modern system, particularly in primary schools and high schools and whatnot, is that it doesn't really even matter if the student scores 50%, they move on to the next topic regardless. So quite often students will score 30%, 40%, it doesn't really matter. They'll get pushed through to the next year. The only time students are really kept down a year is if they're way down here or there are skills issues and things like that. And even then, in this day and age, very few students get kept back, even if academically they have issues. Normally what happens is they'll move up a year and then go into some type of additional program that gives them a lot of additional support and scaffolds and things like that, like a targeted intervention strategy or remedial program or something along those lines. Now, a mastery learning program is slightly different. And no, I'll just use the same pen. A mastery learning program is where there is a requirement to get to about this mark here. Let's say that is 80%. They are required to get 80% before they can move on. So in any topic or body of knowledge or whatever, anything above 80% is considered to be mastery learning. Now, quite often 90% is actually the goal. So with 90%, it gives students the ability to get a couple of stupid things wrong in a test or whatnot. And what happens is, over a period of time with mastery learning, a student will be reassessed, usually individually, at different points until they can actually achieve to that level. So they might not assess all, there won't be a formal assessment where all students go in and sit down and do an exam, for example, although there can be. But generally speaking, in a classroom environment anyway, mastery learning happens when the teacher or teacher aide formatively assesses the student, as in, and formative basically means informally. That's how I generally think about it in a very simple sense. So they might do an oral interview, ask some questions, have a look at work samples, that kind of stuff, and then make the decision that they're at that 80 or 90% mark, and then decide that it's okay for that student to move on to the next level or to the next topic or whatever it may be. Now, there are various different, there is one main advantage of using mastery learning. So this is the type of strategy that you would use, for example, if you were teaching someone how to operate on another human being, if you were teaching someone in that area where safety is a key consideration. You want them to be pretty damn good at something before you let them tick them off on that particular thing and let them go on and do the next thing. So if they were learning an electrical type trade or a mechanical type trade, you really don't want people to be servicing the brakes on your car when they only get it right about 50% of the time. That doesn't really work. So in that case, in a given test or in a given checklist or whatever, you need them to be able to get about 90% of that task right, making sure that of the things they do get right are the core competencies, the core most important aspects of that particular task. Now, and that 10% is just that little give there where they might do something stupid that isn't really that important. That's, I suppose, the area for improvement, and the gap between where they're at now and where someone who's been doing it for 20 years would be able to do it, or a trainer or the person who's been employed as the expert in that particular area. But mastery learning does apply in the school environment as well. It's a little bit more tricky, especially if you're dealing with large volumes of students, which is quite common these days, or always has been quite common. But mastery learning does get used in the school environment. It actually came originally from the medical field, I believe. It might be the engineering field. I think it's medical where that was first used to train medical students. So it's this idea that they need to get to a high level of standard, or a high standard, before they're allowed to move on to do the next thing. So that could be, I don't know, I'm just making this up, but maybe they're able to accurately diagnose patients with an accuracy rate that's pretty much close or approaching perfect, because it's not the type of thing that you want to stuff up that regularly. So, and then of course those students would then be able to go on to the next section, which builds on it. So it's a little bit more complicated, or it's more difficult, or maybe they actually need to be able to do that to close to 100% as a prerequisite to be able to do the next part of their training, because the next part requires that background or foundational skills and knowledge. So in a classroom environment with high school students or primary school students, mastery learning can still be used, and it is quite effective. And it basically means that students get to a certain level of standard before they're allowed to do the next sort of project. So you could imagine, for example, in an art class where students are required to be able to produce a product to a certain level of quality, say a pot or a painting or something like that, before they're allowed to move on to do something that's a bit more complicated, or just the next project. So the teacher might decide that a mastery learning program is the most effective way of going about doing that, or that's what they want to achieve. And there is probably a really good main reason for why you would do a mastery learning session, and that's because you're going for quality over quantity. Now, I like to graph it. So this is just my little graph that I like to use. And basically, no, I've done that wrong. In a normal classroom, say a normal maths classroom, English classroom, science, whatever, let's say the student scores around 50%. No, let's make this student a bit smarter. That student scores 60% in each of the different topics. So say you're in a standard maths classroom and you do 5 or 6 weeks on space, and 5 or 6 weeks on number, and 5 or 6 weeks on whatever the next topic is, and they're scoring sort of like this. So they're all, around about there. They get better at this one. This one they do really badly in. Okay, so this is topic 1, topic 2, topic 3, 4, 5, 6. They cover 6 topics in a semester. So, I'm just making this up as I go. Okay, however, now, so that's just a standard sort of class. And let's say about here is 90%. Now, let's say in that same class, the teacher makes the decision through the planning process that they want the student to reach 90%. And just one other thing, I talk a lot about, I use the word teacher, but inside that, or within that terminology, I also mean teacher aides, particularly if you're running a small program and you're designing out what standard or what level you want students to be at before they move on. So think, for example, a reading program where you have students who are going through the process of level 1 books, level 2 books, level 3 books, and those types of things. All reading programs are pretty much exactly the same, with a couple of different variations. Now, at what standard are you happy for them to get to before you will allow them to move to that next level? And that's probably around that 90% mark. If they were working at, say, 50%, anywhere between 50 and 60% at level 2, that's probably not high enough that you would let them move on to the next level in terms of reading. So now, let's say that you get to there, compare that to a mastery learning. 1, 2, 3, 4. In a mastery learning, so this one is your mastery learning. Let's call that ML, and that's normal. Okay, so in a normal class, they'll have enough time to get through 6 different sessions. 6 different topics, sorry, but the student kind of floats around that 60% mark for most of them. There's some they struggle with, some they do better on, but generally for each section, the student gets around 60%. In mastery learning, there is a bit of a problem because you won't be able to do the same number of topics because it's obviously going to take longer to get from 60% to 90%, right? So that's naturally going to be the case. So you're only going to be able to do 4 topics, say. But the difference is you've got 4 topics where the student scores 90% or higher, as compared to 6 topics where the student is scoring an average of 60%, one of which they're actually scoring quite low. So it's really the trade-off there between which one you would prefer, and whether that particular class or that topic or whatever is going on there is conducive to being able to run a mastery learning based program. Now, you may be thinking that mastery learning is not possible in many instances, and you wouldn't be incorrect. There are some instances where you just can't do mastery learning. It just becomes too hard. So if you've taught middle school before, or even just a large primary school class, it is very difficult to do any type of mastery learning. Not impossible, but very difficult. And that's because if you've got a class of, say, 28 students, to get to that level there on the first topic, so that to get to that 90% mark on the first topic, some students are already there on day 1. Other students will be there on day 7. And let's say each one of these took 3 weeks. Some students will take the full 3 weeks to get to 90%. This student took 3 weeks to get to 60%. So how long is it going to take them to get to 90%? It might actually take, say, 6 weeks. And the big problem there is, what do you do with students who will never make that 90% mark? So of course, watch my videos on setting goals, because this is all, mastery learning is all about goal setting. That's where this all comes from. But you're setting goals that are unusually high. So yeah, just bear that in mind. And also thinking about how you set your assessment is really important for mastery learning as well. But I won't talk about that anymore because we're getting off topic a little bit. So you can only do 4 there, 4 topics there, but you're going to have students who are a little bit all over the place, as far as some are still on topic 1, but some might already be up to topic 3. So you can see how that would work really well in an adult environment. It'd work really well in, say, an art class where you've got students all doing separate projects. It might work really well in a reading program where you've got a small number of students. And it may just be some individual goals that you set students in a particular class. So there's various different ways that mastery learning can be used, but it is particularly useful just to be just as one of those strategies that you keep sitting there, that you bear in mind, that may come in handy in the future, even if you don't actually use it all the time. Okay, so that's mastery learning. Now, the next one I'm going to talk about is overlearning, and I'll continue with this same graph just to give you an idea. But overlearning basically means that the student is going way beyond what they're required to learn in order to guarantee that they have exceeded that benchmark standard. And there's probably 2 or 3 different reasons for why overlearning is used in that sense. So the first one is, if we're talking about, say, people doing surgery or high-risk types of jobs, you want to make sure that they are not just at 90%, but at 110%. So they can do the task that is required of them to meet that competency type standard, and then some. And what happens then is that because they're up here and the level that they're required to be at for 100% is down here, that gap there gives them confidence, and it gives them a huge amount of ability and a huge amount of extra leeway so that they don't make as many mistakes. And they've got that amount of extra knowledge and skill helps to prevent a huge number of mistakes that could potentially lead to catastrophic consequences. So that's one reason why overlearning is used. Another reason why overlearning is used is for students who are sitting exams. So if they can, if you know that in an exam, say you've got 6 different sections in an exam, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, okay, or some type of test, then quite often, and something of a metacognitive skill is teaching students how to divide up exams or assignments or tests or whatever so that they can pass as easily as possible. So for section 1, they may already be at, say, 60%, 40%, 75%, 80%, I'm just making this up, 65%, and 90%. So say they're going into an exam that has 6 different sections, and a lot of teacher aides also work in high schools, just as many as primary schools, but also for teachers that are teaching towards a test. This is just a neat little trick for students, getting them to go into the exam fully prepared, knowing what the different sections are going to be, because usually you can predict what's going to happen because there's only so many things on a particular topic that can be asked in an exam. Now, during that process, as you go down here and you realise, well, hang on, this student already has basically aced these 3 sections, right? So they are really good at this section, and this section. And in fact, they're not far away from these other sections as well. Now, mathematically, you can work out that if they can get close to 100% for those 3 sections, then they've already passed the exam as it is. So one good area for students to concentrate on is to figure out why is it that you're, particularly this one, why are you at 90%? Why are you predicting you're going to get 90%? Let's see, what are the gaps in your knowledge and skills for that particular topic, and how do we get that to 100% or as close to 100% as possible? And one way is to teach to the point of we're actually aiming, and this is a bit of an abstract concept, I guess, to score 120%, or to have the knowledge and ability that is at that 100%, the perfect score mark, and then another 20% on top of that as well. One effect of that is that, well, there's a couple of effects. One is time, and one is stress. Okay, so, and it also, I guess, gives you a bit of leeway. Leeway. Is that how you spell leeway? I think there might be a dash in the middle. Not sure. So for this one here, they're already pretty good at this particular topic, and they're going, but if they can go beyond that 100% mark and know way more than they need to know, they're going to get it done really quick for starters. It's also going to significantly reduce their stress, and they've got a leeway to make the occasional mistake without significantly affecting their score. Hopefully, because they are way beyond that, the standard required, that they're going to be able to learn and avoid a lot of those traps that other students would fall into, particularly if there's a difficult or left of field question that gets thrown into that particular test. Okay, so what it also does is it gives students and the people who are teaching those students a focus. So they can focus on that area to try and get that to 100%. Then they can focus on that area. Then they can focus on that area. Now, assuming that all of these sections are worth a certain, you can mathematically work it out, right? So if that's worth, say, 15%, 15%, 15, 15, 15, and 20%, that gives you 100% if I've done my maths right. Now, of that, they're already going to get 20, and they're going to get another 30 there. So automatically, they're at 50 out of 100, and they don't have to worry about failing that particular exam because they're pretty much guaranteed to get 100. And then they can spend their time concentrating on these 3 areas. And this is where the bulk of their time and your strategies and your teaching expertise can be aimed at. So that's the purpose of overlearning there. The other reason is that these 3, it's very easy to go from 90% to 100% because they already have that foundational knowledge, the conceptual understanding, so on and so forth. So you can very easily just smash those in the exam or the test or whatever it is. And even for non-academic students who are in those non-academic streams, they'll be doing a range of tests and things like that, whether it's a primary school or high school as well. So for example, they may be doing some type of entry test to get into certain courses. They may need to do some type of exam, like learning how to drive a car, for example. So if they were going for a driver's license, overlearning also works if they're doing, say, learning how to do an interview for a job. There's certain questions or certain types of questions that they can become really good at, so that maybe these questions is about your motivation and what you're good at and what your strengths are and so forth. So however those questions are phrased in that interview, that's an area where they know that they're going to absolutely ace that particular question. And then they can spend their time concentrating on these other sections. So in summary, overlearning is really about you could imagine trying to score 120% either in specific sections or in one or more sections. And there are obviously benefits of that, such as if number 6 gets done, normally you'd allocate, if that's a 20% cost, the score is possible. The possible score is 20%. It means that you would devote around about 20% to that particular task there. But because they're so good at it, they're going to get it done in a significantly quicker period of time, which frees up more time for these other areas further up here. So there's lots of different applications for overlearning. It's really good for stress. It's really good for that student to build their motivation and self-esteem and to feel like they've really mastered something. And that's where the link between mastery learning and overlearning happens, because just to continue with this graph, to I guess drill that point home, now here we'll call that OL. Now, quite often with obviously overlearning, if we're talking about volume of different topics, then remember this is the 100% mark. So that's the 100% mark there. We're going to want a student to go to there and maybe to there and then there and so on and so forth. So maybe you're only going to get 3 topics done. Bearing in mind as well that the gap here and here, well, all of those gaps, but I just need a different pen to do it. These gaps here to get to 100%. Sometimes, it depends on the topic, but sometimes those gaps are very, very simple and easy to fill because it's just an area where the student didn't really pay much attention or something. But then other times to jump from that 80 or 90% mark to 100 is really, really difficult, particularly in those areas where you're being marked subjectively. So if students are writing essays and things like that, that's where it becomes real tricky, and maybe overlearning can still be used in that sense, but sometimes it can be quite frustrating if you don't know how the marker will go about giving you a score, even if there is some type of rubric. But quite often those rubrics that are used are, again, very subjective. And I know they do moderation and things like that, but sometimes you submit sometimes essays can come back and it's just a flip of a coin of what you're going to score or what students are going to score. So that's basically the difference between mastery learning and overlearning. I wouldn't be too concerned about overlearning, generally speaking, if you're just starting to learn all the different teaching strategies. Again, it's another one just to put to the side. Remember that it's there. Maybe use it in the future. Individual students can definitely use overlearning, because if you've got a student who's a high-performing student, they're hopefully going to score really well in, say, an exam of some description or a test coming up or a project or whatever it is, then thinking about whether you instigate an overlearning strategy so that student can guarantee to score 100% in that project or assignment or unit of work or whatever it is certainly a discussion to be had, I guess. Mastery learning is probably the one where you'll spend the most amount of time, particularly. Well, it does apply to all different types of topics and classes. There are obviously issues with it because of the timing effect there, but certainly I would say mastery learning is much more common than overlearning. So that's the basics of those 2 strategies, and thank you for watching.